Thank you for inviting me here. I'm really happy to be here to see some colleagues that I had for a lifetime and saying a few words as homage to Francois Zanceau. This is a technical talk, so I will not talk about Francois' work, but about other type of work. This is the final objective of what he wanted to do. Here you're seeing a supercomputer, and you're seeing now several of these machines. We are in the exascale computing area, so you're talking about 10 to the 18 flops, 14 point operation per second. Where are they? Well, Japan, US, China. There's incredible competition in order to have the most powerful computing machines. And in order to understand, where we'll be in the future, we might want just to look at the past. So let me bring you back by 500,000,000 years in the Cambrian time. There was a big change on the Earth. It was a change that was related to the fact that life before was mainly done by a single cell system, and life evolved into pluricellular organisms. So if you bring we come back to today, that we live basically on silicon, we can see something that it's in parallel, that we have many technologies that can be combined. And we think that the computing system of the future will try to leverage other computing technologies or computing paradigms in order to just speed up computation and therefore achieve acceleration. And the picture on the right is just a PCM on silicon that's work done at IBM. Now, of course, what are the expectations and limitations of what we are doing? We have increasingly higher demand for computing cycles. We know that manufacturing and operating costs will go up. Actually, what is most scary is this picture that shows the energy consumption of computing and communication that might be in the 12 to 25% of the total energy production by 2030. We don't know where we're going to be because there will be probably some legislation that will help, limiting the CO2 consumption and production, but also we are going to have systems that are more saving in terms of energy consumption just by using circuit design and technologies. What is technology today? Okay, I think that somebody hacked my computer. There's a picture there that is not related. Just checking your attention. So whenever I see FinFETs, I always think of mountains. Whenever I see the nanosheets, I think that I'm back from the dentist. For some reason, this picture is similar. But where we are now is that we have FinFETs, we have nanowires, we have nanosheets, which is the evolution of the nanowires. We have the 5 nano in production. There are always the Cassandras who says that Moore's law is finished, but I heard this talk 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago today, but we are still actually improving the technology. The fact is that just very few companies end up using the advanced technologies. TSMC has sold all its production of last year and this year to Apple. Now, the 3 nano node is coming, has been announced, and TSMC and IBM announced the 2 nano node that's coming. So scaling is still going on. But is there life beyond silicon? Yes, there is. This is a very interesting work. This was done by the group of Max Schulaker at MIT in conjunction with Analog Design Company. And it's a RISC processor. It's a 16-bit processor that involves about 14,000 transistors, all done with carbon electronics. There's no silicon there. That's basically, these are carbon nanotubes that can be doped. They behave in a similar way to CMOS transistor. And with that, you can make a processor. More than that, I think what's interesting is this type of technology can stack because it's a low temperature process, relatively low, of course, but you can go toward 3D integration with such a technology. So why do people look at this? Well, as I said, people have an incredible appetite for speed of computing, and the carrier mobility in the carbon nanotubes is higher than in bulk silicon by about 2 orders of magnitude. So if you play your design well in terms of devices, circuit, and architectures, you can gain in the end in terms of speed. Or, more simply, if you have something that is very thin as a device, as a transistor, you can still push and sink current to drive wires, which is typically the problem, in a better way as compared to silicon. Well, we have to realize that the manufacturing process is still young. These carbon nanotubes come with a lot of defects that need to be corrected. Yield is probably an issue today if you want to make a product out of that, but this technology is showing a certain level of maturity. Another technology that I like to mention is superconducting electronics, and it is a classical computing paradigm. But with this classical in the sense that this is not quantum computing, it's a highly pipeline type of technology, and you can achieve accurate data flows that operate in the 50 to 100 gigahertz range. You also have a fairly low power consumption per gate. This is very low because quantum of flux actually used to broadcast the information. Sadly enough, the refrigerators to bring the superconductors down to 4 Kelvin take about 99% of the energy to run these chips. And as a result, still we are at the edge of being competitive, but it is something extremely interesting to observe for accelerators. And of course, I couldn't finish this review without mentioning quantum computing because that's all over in the press. And quantum computing is interesting because it leverages two properties that are not used in classical computing. These are superposition and entanglement. And as a result, because of this, you can support algorithms that have lower complexity. The classical example is that you can do factoring in polynomial time, integer factoring, while you cannot do that on a classical computer. And so this opens up the way of how you can use this technology to break into somebody else's code, or how you can actually develop technologies for security that will be resistant to quantum attacks. There are many realization technologies for quantum computing. Could be superconductors, silicon, could be optics. The final word has not been said yet on what will be the final target of quantum computing. But of course, scaling and noise are issues. Qubit count and coherence times are limited, and refrigeration is more of a problem because you have to be in the order of tenth of millikelvin, which means that your refrigerator has even to be more performing as compared to working at 4 Kelvin. So I want to talk here a little bit about the superconducting electronic first. And probably some of you remember that was a big thing in the 70s and the beginning of the 80s. IBM had launched a big program on that. The Japanese companies followed, and the world was supposed to be actually made of superconducting supercomputers. But then in 1983, IBM actually decided to stop doing that. And why that? It was because they were not able to achieve really fast circuits, and CMOS was improving at a rate which was outstanding. And so they decided to stop. But then also the Japanese companies, they tried to improve the materials, but then by the end of the 80s, they stopped actually doing that. It was the main problem that was there. It was a problem called latching. This technology actually works using two terminal devices that are the Josephson junctions. That's a device that can be superconducting or can be resistant. And the transition happens when the current flowing through will go above a certain threshold. So this is the basic scheme. You bias this circuit. The pulse comes in from the left. There's too much current. Yes, please.
What exactly is latching for you?
I'm just saying it. You just asked the question at the right one. So signal comes in from the left, and what happens, too much current, the Josephson junction actually becomes resistive, you have a 0 to 1 transition. But then you have to restore it. And to restore it, it's much more complicated. You need circuitry to bring back the JJ to the superconducting state. So somehow it glues up, and that's what is called latching. And that was the problem that was not solved by IBM in the 80s. The problem was kind of solved by the Russians, actually Likarev and his group. A lot of scientists that were at Moscow in the beginning of the 90s. Most of them moved to the East Coast of the United States. And the idea there was to use communication in superconducting via pulses. These are quantized pulses that you can think that of pulses of 2 picoseconds for 1 millivolt that correspond to a physical quantity that would be a minimum of energy that you need to put in to transmit the information. Actually, in terms of dimension, that's a flux. That's why it's called single flux electronics. And if you design the circuit in an appropriate way, what happens is that the pulse will come in, will make the JJ, the Josephson junction switch, and then it will propagate as a signal that will go out. So you can build this circuit that it's a Josephson transmission line, which basically can ripple signals from the left to the right. Of course, these are simplification. I'm not going through the detailed circuitry for that. So this has been interesting. This has brought back actually quite a few interests on these technologies. And what are the logic design principles behind? One important thing is that if you design like this, you have to balance all the paths. So if you imagine that your combinational logic is a graph where the nodes are the gates, then the distance from the input to each gate along all the path has to be the same. Why? Because these pulses will get to the gate, have to get to the gate at the same time, and there's a clock that helps the gate actually switching. The gate is a variation of a circuit that's called squid, that's often used in interferometry, and it's used for measuring magnetic fields, but every gate in this technology gets clocked. And this, of course, is a complication, but this is the enabler for achieving this fast data path. The other problem that you have with this technology is fan-out. Well, fan-out has been a problem for all technologies. In CMOS, you have to buffer every fan-out, but here in superconductor, you basically have one single pulse, and if you want to split it, you need a circuit that is a splitter that out of a pulse will make two pulses. And that, of course, as usual, it's a pain in the neck for the design. Uh, Logic optimization is also interesting in here because some of the superconducting technology, there's not one, there are actually many variants, can be represented by majority logic. And so actually you have to think when you do the logic optimization, not in terms of nans and nors, but more in terms of majority functions and inversions. So what is majority logic? Majority logic was, again, something well known in the 60s where there was a lot of work because it relates a lot to the design of arithmetic logic units. So a majority gate has an odd number of inputs and the output is true if the majority of the inputs are true. So if you start from this idea that's actually quite simple, you can build a few axioms and then you can define a Boolean algebra starting from the majority operator and the inverter. And what's interesting about this formulation is that the axioms represent a formula that is sound and complete. Beside all the theoretical aspect, the impact on design is that a graph that represents the logic by majority logic is a reachable graph, which means that if you are have a design and you would like to transform the design in a design which is optimal for power, area, delay, or whatever, there is a set of moves, of changes on this graph that will take you to the optimum. This does not exist for other formulation, like for example, an inverter graph. You might not be able to reach the optimum. Does this matter? Of course, yes and no. It matters because you can be hopeful to get to the best, but the number of steps that you need may be still a number of steps that's exponential because the problem of optimizing logic is still an intractable problem from computational complexity. But this formulation actually would help. And so there are methods that actually are based on rewriting the graphs, as well as exploiting the redundancy of the majority function. The majority function is by itself has some redundancy, and so it can be used to reshape the circuit in order to have better properties. Now, I mentioned the technology and its variants. We heard the name variants a lot. in the last 2 years. This is a sketch about the bad thing that we have been dealing with. But in this case, the technology SFQ at the beginning was called resistive SFQ. Then Licker found out that that name was not attractive enough, so he called it rapid. And that was one of the first generation of superconductors. And the variation is how you bias these gates. You can bias with resistors, you can bias with inductors, so you can make it fairly complex, and in the end you gain in terms of power. There are two technologies that are used today, which are ESFQ and ESQ, that again a question of how the biasing is done. These are the ones that are most used. There's a low voltage version. There is a dynamic version, interesting enough, that was brought by E.B. Friedman and his colleagues at Rochester. This is fairly recent. And the idea is that these gates are kind of self-resetting, so it actually reduces the presence of clocks in there. And then there are the adiabatic variances. And the adiabatic circuit, the power actually goes up and down on a sine wave. And as a result, whenever you have transfer of charge or transfer of flux, you do it over low voltages or low currents. As a result, the consumption is much less. And actually, out of this, there are two variants. One is the RQL, which is done by Northrop Grumman in the US, and the other one is AQFP, done in Japan, maybe at the Yokohama State University. So this is what's around today. Achievements, what people do with that, this is a SFQ FFT processor that's running at 50 gigahertz, kind of interesting. This is recent. This is a RISC, 4-bit RISC, it's still small, done in adiabatic logic that's much more complex to design, and this was done by the Japanese quite recently. Synopsys actually shown last year that you can have a flow where you can start from a high-level language and then you map it into superconducting gates. So you do the entire synthesis flow by using their tools as well as modification thereof so that you can synthesize such circuits. Some numbers, just to have a sense of where you are. The SFQ runs at about 50 gigahertz. The adiabatic version just, let's say, 10 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, just 10% of that. Size, I don't think that people have designed circuit with more than 1 million JJs, but we are in the order of 100,000 to 1 million. And energy consumption is 2 orders less than CMOS. And so the efficiency of the cooling mechanism is actually the key thing. Actually, this table is quite impressive. If you look on the right part and you have the references there, you see the energy delay product, which is getting low and low as you advance the type of superconducting technology. Again, there the cooling system is really the major problem, but I'm quite confident that the problem will get better because there's a lot of effort in doing coolers for quantum computing where the temperatures have to be much lower. Now, let me switch to quantum. So, in order to talk about quantum, I have to talk about the cat. That's my favorite cat, that's Schrödinger's cat. So this cat is in a box, and he's watching actually radioactive decay, but you can think that as the result of quantum computer. A result of a quantum computer can be true or false. You don't know what it is until you open the box. Now, in Schrödinger experiment, what happens that if the result is true, then a weight will crush the bottle with the poison and the cat will die. So according to the quantum interpretation, then you have a box and you have a cat that may be alive or may be dead. Only when you open the box, you figure out whether your darling cat is alive or whether the cat has died. But still, you have to think that the cat is alive or dead at the same time before opening the box, which is something that is troubling for our thinking. But this is actually the beauty and the mystery behind quantum computing. And also this cat can actually represent, the position of many companies that don't know whether they should jump on quantum computing or not, because we still don't know whether it will work practically or not. It does work, but in the end, we care about practical results. Well, there have been many interesting chips. This is the Intel 49. There are chips actually that have about 150 qubits. This actually, it's IBM's Q machine. And when I see this picture, I remember a statement by Ken Olsen, the CEO of digital equipment, that was 1977. He said, I think that nobody in his or her right mind would like to have a computer at home. Now, if we rephrase it, would anybody would like to have a quantum computing at home or in the office? Well, given the weather conditions, probably having a quantum computing will help to keep the temperature down. But you have to also consider that's a fairly complex and delicate object. And again, the question is not just having it home, but whether you want it in your company or you would like to this technology to be just owned by companies like Amazon that sell you services so that you don't have to bother with vibrations, with temperature changes, and so on. So I don't know. Maybe in a few years from now, everybody will have it, and it will be miniaturized, and that will help. Also cooling your water. So quantum computing is a complex object, and actually you go for a hierarchy of temperatures. You have to bring some signals from the host because that's basically an accelerator. Quantum computer is only an accelerator. You bring in some information from the host, you bring it down to a low temperatures, and then you have circuit that will drive the quantum computing chips where the computation happens. Now, how do you do the design with that? Design is based on exploiting properties like parallelism, superposition, and entanglement. This seems a mystery to many of us. First, it's hard to think in parallel ways. We all have written algorithms and programs in C or similar language, but when we have to write them in a parallel way, that may be complicated. Imagining superposition, it's hard. There are physical models in which are not in a universe, we are in a multiverse, and we should actually think of ourselves and being split in several states. But that's not an easy way to think of recipes, algorithms to solve problems. So the question is how easy we can abstract the parallel computation. For mathematicians and theoretical physicists, that's easy. You see, that picture there is a sketch of Grover's algorithm that actually can do searching in square root of n time. So it has basically a quadratic speed up of a classical computing. It's a fantastic circuit, but it's not that easy to take those boxes and map them through synthesis in a connection of logic gates or quantum gates. And by the way, when people talk about quantum gates, the quantum gates is an abstraction that looks like assembly code. Once you have the quantum circuits, then this, according to the technologies they are using, these circuits represent how you would send through radio frequency information to your chip, how you would get it back, how it's decoded. So various quantum gates will have different costs. And so when you talk about making the synthesis, then you have two issues. One is the technology independent optimization, that you have to go from boxes that actually represent operations to reversible logic, because in reality, in physics, everything is reversible. And then you have to map to your library, and then the library that's used today most often is the Clifford plus T library, where you have various gates, not that many, but each one has its peculiarity. And as technology changes, and it does change quite quickly, then of course all that changes as well. So what is, when people like me in design automation, what is the problem you have? You want to have a retaggable computation flow. You start from languages, for example, Qiskit by IBM, Q Sharp, or Cirque. You want from there go from the algorithm to the assembly code. And then, of course, the assembly code has to be mapped to the real instruction, the code gen, the bottom part of the compiler is the most complicated one, because you have really to abstract and deal with the computation at the physical level. Actually, this is a nice picture I just borrowed from IBM. You have a piece of code on the top, and this code gets compiled into a quantum circle, which is in the middle. The quantum circle is a little bit like a matrix, where the rows correspond to the qubit and the columns correspond to the step of the computation. You don't want to have too many qubits because the chip gets too big. You don't want to have a long computation because then you don't have coherence and everything goes bananas. But then this is mapped into two implementation, one using a technology based on trapped ions, one using superconductors. And as you see, you get circuits that are different. Well, I wanted just to give you an idea of what's out there and what's hot. Let me come to some conclusions. There are several commercial realizations of both technologies that I mentioned, superconducting electronics and quantum computers. different families because they are not the same thing. They're quite apart from each other, and they are fairly interesting. The realization addressed different markets, but in both cases, we can see that as co-processor. So what we want to do is accelerate computation, being able to build supercomputers or being able just to build computers, because no matter how super or not super is your computer, we have always a lot of computation to do. Uh, what is the gorilla in the closet is the power consumption. We want to achieve that with a reasonable power consumption. Now, both this technology needs cooling, and so the thermodynamics of the cooling is the one that actually is a limitation today. And I think that this technology brings up a new way of conceiving and using computers. There's no fundamental problem that will limit to using them. There are many technical important problems to solve, and I would say that the future is not without surprises. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nani. Any question? I think Ahmed is having a question there.
Thank you, Nani, for this always fantastic talks. I have a question for you. Uh, we we have a crisis of computing, of energy efficiency computing, and we need to gain some orders of magnitude in energy efficiency. In the history, we always change technology to get to another layer of or another level of efficiency. We went from this tube computing to bipolar technology to CMOS technology. Do you believe honestly that quantum computing will allow us to get to the next level?
I'll give you the quantum answer. Maybe yes, maybe not. When you open the box, you will see. No, I've seen a lot of progress. Google came out with that article about quantum supremacy, but in the end, the algorithm that was running on an incredibly large instance was basically like flipping a bit. That's not something really useful. Um, I think you have to look at quantum computing on two angles. One is to use it as an accelerator and having solutions that have approximate solutions. And this is actually already used for quantum chemistry and quantum physics. You have some problems that are continuous, they are tremendous to optimize them, and quantum computing there can help. Then there's the real dream that you can have quantum computing with no errors, with error correction built in there, so that then you can do, like factoring. You don't care about factoring. You can factor big numbers. If then you get just an error of 1 bit, it's worth nothing. So either it's exact or it's not exact. And there we are still far. So the question is whether we can get there and we can have a machine that is practical, again, in terms of because when you want to have more or less 100 qubits that are error correct, you have to start from 100,000 qubits that are not error correct. And that step is quite large. So I wouldn't risk to take an answer on that, whether that would be feasible with reasonable cost. But some use of quantum computing will be there.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and everything. Sorry that I cannot hold this presentation in French. And if I will, then you will need a Google translator from French to French anyway. So let's keep going. I will stay actually into quantum computing. So since it's so much fun, and then I didn't know Francois at all. I know basically his children, right? Like Ahmed, and I admire. It's one of the reasons why I'm here. And I guess if he were alive, this will be an area where he will be doing a lot in quantum computing. So this journey is actually an interesting one since it started many, many moons ago, right? The quantum mechanics and, Richard Feynman is pretty famous, right? And he did not really invent everything related to quantum mechanics, but made it definitely known to a broader public. and we are talking about 1982, right? 1982, basically the basics of the quantum mechanics has been described. Around 85, David Deutsch, and I have no idea how they've been, killing his name in Oxford, but that's his kind of his name, describes the first quantum machine, and then this could be compared to the Turing's first approaches in the early days, or Boole's, as we heard, and then in '94, Peter Shor from AT&T came up with a quantum algorithm to factor very large polynomial time numbers. That is, I would say, the starting point where the first algorithms and realization of those algorithms started to make sense to a broader, let's say, research public, right? In '97, Bell Labs, Lou Grover, develops a quantum research algorithm in complexity. Now, there I am stopping because from there it started to go much, much broader. I just dropped a couple of those names, just to give you an idea. This is not something which happened yesterday. So there is a lot happened since then. I mean, you did see from Nani the IBM's Q engine. This is a 50 qubit machine, and it's a dilution refrigerator. Needs between 5 to 10 millikelvins. I mean, if you think about those temperatures, these are not something which you would even imagine, right? It takes a serious amount of energy to get all of those things under control. I wanted to show you the next picture to give you the gradient, right, where it starts, right, and the top where basically the whole management circuitry is 2.7 Kelvin. I mean, that's already an insanely low temperature, right? And but the execution is happening around 2 millikelvin, we are talking about minus 270 Celsius for the ones who cannot remember his or her physics classes, and so the PCB, which is kind of in this insanely cool environment, is the one which reflects the qubit at around 20 millikelvins, protected from environment with multiple shields. So I did see this machine, with my own eyes, and it is interesting to see, because don't get confused by the size of the machine. The size of the machine doesn't really do anything. This is just only the side effect, where the whole, compute is happening is in a usual PCB the size of, smaller than my hand at the end of the day. Everything else is needed to manage that and then cool it. Now, will this get better? But high likelihood. We are talking about, engineering, and if you look, how we started to fly, in 1800s, and how we are flying today. The engineering somehow, manages over time to get the mechanical and physical issues under control. The element which was always challenging is, what the heck is a qubit, right? And that's still tough to understand, right? First, the famous cat, which is superpositioned in liveliness and deadliness, and it is a challenge from the algorithm's perspective, right? To realize that multiple states are happening at the kind of same time, and that is not a traditional bit at the end of the day, right? It is a quantum system, and that's basically reflects the qubit. Each of those exponentially many possibilities at the end of the day can be modeled with these qubits. In a quantum computer, at the end, right, one qubit is could be both 0 and 1 at the same time. And it's a game of probability and an error correction, if you want to see it that way. The beauty of the qubit is, since multiple bits and multiple states are happening at the same time, more of them you have, right? Much higher parallelism you are achieving, right? If you compare it for a 64-bit, basically, word today, which we are all used to in a traditional risk engine, which translates to an 18 billion times faster competition, because all of those bits are alive or existent states at the same time. And that's the scare, actually, what the quantum computing is bringing to us. Why is it a scare? And yes, energy is a problem, but at certain level, it's irrelevant, right? At a certain level, it's irrelevant because of the speed which is enabling you. This quantum system is basically an example of physical implementation. Can be done in, I will say, multiple ways, whether it is energy levels of an atom or a spin of an atom, which we all know. Hopefully, we are not using that often, but if you go to an MRI machine, we are using already that spin element, right, today. So we are not, let's say, unused to deal with this quantum mechanic effects today. The thing is, how to run those machines in an efficient way. So a qubit, as I said, could be an atom, could be a nuclear spin, it could be a polarized photon. I think Nani was talking about that, or a trapped ion. Actually, that's currently the most popular way of implementing it. And an collection of n qubits is basically a quantum register to make things simpler. And the famous dentist pictures are playing a role here. I wanted to show you, a couple of those things. There's a silicon spin qubit already implemented today, and then there's a superconductor version. There's a trapped ion qubit from University of Pittsburgh, Duke University, and a trapped ion version published. MIT has one as well. And so there are many research institutes spending immense amount of time to get this thing going. Unfortunately, I don't have the latest numbers. These are numbers from 2017. And then we are talking about $1.5 billion, or actually in this case, euros, because I think I copied that from Economist. And worldwide, money spent on quantum computing. And then you can see the big players, right? United States putting around 360 million and China 220. And then collectively, European Union puts a lot of money in it too. I don't think these numbers are accurate today, because in the last couple of years, the investment went bonkers. We are talking about nearly $1 billion just in the United States in quantum computing. And then China's numbers you cannot trust whatsoever, because there is a huge military-industrial complex in China spending money in quantum computing over many years. So these are numbers which economists came up with. I don't know where they are coming up with, but the investment is real. And so if you are looking today how the implementation goes, is there is a CMOS compatible qubit, it's one example of many. Uses basically a MOS gate to electrostatically confine electrons, and basically this is kind of, I would say, state of the art of today. And if you look at today's qubits, I borrow this one from a Berkeley publication, is basically running around, again, as I said, around 20 millikelvins to 100 millikelvins, and electronics still is at 300 kelvins. So it is, a normal room temperature, more or less, but the rest is extremely cool. And qubit is associated with readout and then control electronics, and it's an EPFL activity. Maybe Nani had his fingers in it. Another one is, which we believe we will see more, is a merger of those, right? Basically electronic, going around 4 Kelvin. And it's basically a more monolithic integration. And once we are going to the monolithic integration, I think we will see more and more repeatability of these productions. Now, if you look at the quantum computing progress, right, around June 2021, this is China, described a 66 qubit superconducting quantum processor. Calculation utilize only 56 qubits at 2 to 3 times faster than Google's 53-bit processor. So the pissing contest is starting, right, like we had back in the day with the supercomputers. Then there's a Rigetti multi-chip quantum processor enabling an 80 qubit system this year. And IBM will release the Eagle, which is 127 qubit quantum. And then, as you remember, right, each one of those bits is helping you to grow this thing exponentially. This processor is coming this year, not in, and then actually the 433 qubit processor is coming this year. The 127 is, I think, already accessible. I didn't see myself yet. And then there is one in the doing with 1,121 qubit device. And then we are now talking about an insane level of computation parallelism, targeted 2023. I mean, you can read that from the IBM's blog. They are regularly talking about that and very, very active and very open about it. Google is reducing the qubit error rates and plans to develop a 1 million qubit processor by 2029. So they are serious about taking all this advertisement money and how to sell you whatever stuff you want to have to something maybe more useful, and that's going in a crazy speed. We are not stopping here either. Nani kindly mentioned our Super Tools activity. This is actually an IARPA project. So it's not only us, but we are very, very serious about this. I mean, if you see the EDA companies are getting into this, you can assume, like you mentioned, Monica, about the CMOS and then CAT, then you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared that there is something will happen sooner or later. This is about the superconducting area, right? The EDA software we are developing, right, up to 10 million JJ gates. And we will like to demonstrate that with working processors. We are using multiple processors for that. One from my organization, one off the shelf, RISC, and then an Open Spark, and we use the Leon as well. And criteria is support one or more CE logic families and enables full scalability and speed of the tools and whatnot. It's a poor research project. I mean, there is no financial return on this one anytime soon. But we are targeting right in the next 4 to 5 years, reasonably reliable tool flows for the SCE and then quantum world. And we believe, at least in the EDA industry, we are driving the leadership in this space, not tooting into our own horn too much. And then we had started, utilization of this EDA activity We have alliances here too, right, with High Priest or with the Professor Abby Friedman and the University of Rochester or University of Yokohama, and university which has a very high investment in the adiabatic superconducting technology over many, many, many years, again, coming from the days of supercomputers. Now, this is kind of my point of view in those things. Quantum computing today feels like 60s of the IC industry, where we had our first transistor, barely in our hands, and with the idea that you can integrate a circuit in a semiconductor. And it needs a huge investment from industry, alliances, and governments at the end of the day. And we believe we can today already see that QC has its own Moore's law. If you look at the growth of this, that's the reason if we were I guess in the beginning of the days as this whole Boole activity and whatnot started, I think QC will be the fun activity which all of us will be involved. It shines in factoring. I mean, there is no question about that. Not every classical problem can be mapped easily, right? But Shor algorithm is a perfect one, for instance. Exceptional, superior to super classical computers at data sorting, for instance, is a very, very good one. Chemical compound exploration, right? DNA. And the worst element is definitely cracking of encryption. And keep in mind, these are still probabilities, right? So you need error correction, and that's something we don't think, right? We are, all of us are von Neumann children, and then it is a different world, right? And then map that one in our thinking and in algorithms will take some time. But nevertheless, it's coming, and it's unavoidable. So be prepared. So and the reason why we have to be prepared is the challenge on the cybersecurity, and that's actually the main part of my talk. The cybersecurity. I mean, there is no 5 seconds. You listen to news if again, not somebody is invading somebody else. And then even there, all communication is currently accessible to both sides due to limited security, and that's becoming an issue, at least very clearly in U.S. I'm not really sure how it is in France, the mood. But there is no day we are not hearing a ransomware attack coming mainly from Russia, right, in the U.S. And that's a serious element, right? We have issues with the supply chain, right, where we have parts which are not trustworthy, and we have a digital trust issue with the protection of artificial intelligence, automation, and algorithms. So all those things are coming to a superposition of, I will say, bad actors and bad events. And if QC is accessible to those people, we will be in deep shit. As simple as that, right? Because this will be like Enigma days for Germans, and all communication will be available to all the bad actors out there. So, governments are trying to catch up, and this catch up is happening very, very slow, right? There is a CNSA guidance from the US government for certain algorithms. I don't want to list them all today, which we believe will protect us, at least for the first wave of QC-based attacks. And so there's already a word, right? PQC, right? Post-quantum computing solutions for US national security. The current algorithms are LMS and XMSS. Again, they are today under attack as well. The last workshop of this one was in 2021. And there is a paper came out of this August 2021, quantum computing and post-quantum cryptography FAQs. I recommend anybody to read who has interest in this type of fields. Now NIST is heavily pushing, we pushed a third workshop, and there will be a fourth coming. Third was, as I said, last year in June, and many results got published. They are, reasonably strong solutions, and then some ideas about the side channel attacks. And I think the important element was in the post-quantum cryptography or computing world, the challenge will be agility. With high likelihood, these elements will be cracked faster than we think. If QC grows with the speed it's growing. And so there is already the next workshop for next year, I think, in the making. The trouble is, if you look at the fourth workshop coming sometime in 2023, it will take another 12 to 18 months to get the results out of that, standardize, put it on a semiconductor, put it in your system. So some of those things will be ugly. So that means software-based solutions will be needed more and more, and then through that you will need updatability and a certain level of agility to get this thing going. The current publication target for the PQC standards are 2024. Now, we are not stopping on our side as Synopsys either. ACE is one of the activities we are heavily involved. Automatic implementation of secure silicon is another DARPA project. And then, this is one of the other crazy things, right? In the US, right, all DARPA and IRDARPA or IARPA activities are available to all of you guys, right? So you can, it's public information. The goal is enable scalable security that can be traded against PPA objectives, right? Because that's the other thing. We've been talking about energy all the time, power all the time, right? We cannot have our chips 10 times larger to have them secure. I mean, I'm coming from a background where we had explosive devices on the chips just to have security. So these things do exist, right? You don't, fortunately not have it in your cell phone, but there are certain cell phones out there who have those things in, and there is no other way of protecting today against a government attack, and that we are trying to change with this type of projects, right? For the Trojan detection, for the reverse engineering resistance, authenticity detections. And the power side channel attacks and then resistance to it. So a lot going on. This is the flow which we introduced in the ICE project. There we have an ARM and ARC-based reference platform on the platform architect. That's basically a modeling tool. We have the whole EDA flow, including at the end of the day AMI and obfuscation, watermarking, and then locking algorithms, and building whole watermark servers, and then whatnot. We will not do everything, as you can imagine, right? We will not go to the full manufacturing flows. That's out of scope of the ICE. But at least the front end and the management of the IP, watermarking of the IP, identification of the IP, identification of the IP on the chip, and handling all of those will be coming out of this project. We have already the phase one behind us with work products. I recommend go to the appropriate websites and read about that. Provisioning chips using the AMI will become a key, especially for remote services, because I was just talking a second ago about the agility. The only way you can have agility, updating the algorithms going into your system is possible if the authentication is reliable And then if you can rely all the components of those chips, that whatever you are doing, including the incoming software, is trustworthy. So you have hardware security module provisions, certification keys, management. So all that infrastructure we are building, right? We will not be active as Synopsys in all of those, right? But we are trying to show the industry that in all those things will be needed at one stage to have reliable work products out there. Part of it is this security monitoring inputs. I'm not really sure whether how aware you are, but if you look at anything today in the FinFET, each one of those chips have multiple sensors today already on it. They are constantly reporting back home what the status of that chip is, because some of them are running on a higher voltage than specified, for instance. Some of them are running into problems with their memory. So you need a significant element of security monitoring inputs, what we call silicon lifecycle management. And that will be the other thing which we will see in all of those secure chips. A lot of observability, and that observability is something which we are actively working on, and then have products with SLM sensors in our environment. Now, I try to run a movie out of this and to at least save you some time. Hopefully, it was good enough. In summary, quantum computing is coming, if not already there, right? If you listen to the noise in China, there is already usage in certain areas, and security challenges are real. There is no doubt about that, and the people who are in this business are pretty scared. We need a holistic approach, right? It is not only how to get security and encryption tougher. We need if you are doing SCE, right? Better EDA tools, reliable IP, and then a platform where you can exchange that IP, right? I believe we are on the right track. At least all the signs are there. The investments are there. But time is of essence on this one. And although I still believe we are in the 60s of the CMOS today, I think the time element is much, much faster. So if you just look back and how long it took from the cassette tape to the CD and from CD to streaming, the acceleration of the innovation is much, much faster than we are able to keep up. And that's one of the scares if it comes to security. So we need all the smart hats in this one. And then we need a much better coordination, at least in the similar-minded people, right? Because the challenge from autocratic regimes are real as well. And so we cannot ignore it anymore. And that's that. Thank you.
Thank you, Yankin. So any questions?
Well, thank you. I certainly appreciated your defense of quantum computing. And you stressed a few drawbacks, difficulties rather, one of them being decoherence, for example. Right. But in one of your slides, the last line, which sounds like a drawback or something, might be misleading. That is, the last line of that slide, you say that the results are probabilistic, yeah? And you on the same line, you mentioned error correction. Mm-hmm. That's two completely different issues, in fact. Mm-hmm. The issue of probabilistic is a quantum algorithmic issue. That is, quantum algorithms have the purpose is to make the probability of having a relevant result being close to one.
Right.
That's quantum algorithmics. The issue of error is a physical issue, it's completely different.
Right.
Okay, so that's not a drawback. That's just saying that quantum algorithmics is something completely different from classical algorithmic.
Correct.
And the error correction have nothing to do with that.
Yeah. The error correction is coming with, one is intrinsic of the, to quantum computing, right? So it's an algorithmic challenge. Error correction is coming through the implementation. The implementation element is today still a transition to the deterministic world, and that's generating how we are dealing with the results and implementation of those results. They don't have to do anything with each other, but we are still not able to, let's say, raw data from the probabilistic world. We cannot interpret, and that's generating the additional challenge. That's what I meant with the error correction. But there's implementation issues for sure.
Any other question?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I have one question. How does the quantum computing affect the software industry, or does it?
It will affect. The question is whether quantum computing will be used for day-to-day applications. I think it will be an extremely specialized use for certain algorithms, and then from that perspective, I'm not seeing a broad software industry getting impacted on it, but there will be specialists needed for these algorithms and its implementation and integration to the let's say general software, and that's at least where I am seeing. I'm not seeing that we will need tens of thousands of algorithm developers for quantum computing in near future, but we will need hundreds of them.
Well, you have this afternoon we have another presentation of the CMP. The CMP is an achievement of Professor Anso that has lasted for more than 40 years. And I will speak only on the 2 first years. The CMP is a foundry service for circuit of education and research. Okay. Well, I will try to stress the reason why the CMP was successful. One of the first reason, I will put one slide per reason. One of the first, which is not here, is a competition between university professors. I mean, in early 80, in fact, in the academic year 80-81, we started giving lecture on VLSI design. And VLSI design before has been in the hand of a researcher in solid-state circuits. And there were also ideas was that the design of circuits, microprocessors, by this field, was a problem of people from computer science and not from solid-state thing. So that was the first reason. Well, when the DEA de microelectronique was started, also was not chosen to be the head of this field. And it was very disappointed. So it is perhaps one of the reasons, there were several others, why he left Grenoble in 85. So the second reason is the background. There were a lot of companies that were doing research on and semiconductor around Grenoble. You have the list here, and at the end, all these companies were taken by ST Microelectronics to become part of ST. Well, this is a stamp. In fact, none of those companies were providing a technology that was suitable for us, for education. The CNET started just 1 year later in 1981. And this stamp is for the inauguration of the CNET close to Grenoble. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Second reason, the VLSI revolution in the US. In 79, there was a first nationwide course of VLSI design in the US that include MIT, Caltech, Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, University of Illinois, Berkeley, University of Washington, and so forth. And this very same year, François also visited Professor Carver-Mead. We spoke already of Professor Carver-Mead this morning. Carver-Mead is the one who coined the term Moore's law. He's not Gordon Moore, but he coined the law. And Lincoln Way in Xerox Park in Stanford campus. And they gave us two very interesting things: the instructor guidebook for VLSI design and the guide to LSI in presentation. That was very thick. I think I can remember the guide for LSI in presentation is 300 pages. But there is a but. We could use, of course, the design rule, but not their foundry. The access to Moses is the foundry for metal oxide semiconductor implementation, and it was denied to non-American university. And it was most probably a chance for us, since we have to find another way to make circuit. So, as I told just before, there were no suitable technology available around Grenoble. The CNET technology will come 1 year later, and we have to find another foundry, university foundry in Europe. And we found it in Louvain-la-Neuve in Belgium, when they were doing research on MOS technology, and they have an enhancement depletion, N-channel, polysilicon gate technology. And they have, as I say, a clean room, an old second-hand ion implementer, and furnaces for low-power chemical vapor deposition and diffusion. And so they were able to manufacture what we wanted. And in 1907, François also met Charles Trulmans, who was leading the lab at this time, and later became the dean of the university. And they met in a NATO school, and Charles Trulmans agreed to manufacture the circuit design in Grenoble. So they have also Girex. I will speak again about this machine, which is an electromechanical photocomposer. So we got the design rule from the Mead and Conway's book, Introduction to VLSI Design. On the left, you have a page for the Mead and Conway book, and on the right, the design rules that were distributed to the students in Grenoble. And you can see they are almost the same. I mean, we made a copy of the American design rule. We got also, for the Mead and Conway design kit, a set of 5 pre-characterized cells, two for power supply, VDD and VSS, bound pi. I mean, those cells are necessary to connect the integrated circuit to these packages by bonding, by soldering. So there was an input pad, an input pad, and a bidirectional input-output pad. And I want to stress that to design those part of circuit is rather difficult, since we have no simulator at that time, very few tools. So we were using exactly the cell from Mead and Conway. The students in their project designed their circuit with a color pencil, if they wanted, or black and white pencil, but they had to mark the color, on a sheet of paper, which was 1/10 of an inch, 2.56 centimeter square grid, because the 1 millimeter was too thin to distinguish several. And this design on a sheet of paper was then taped on a digital graphic table for digitalization, and each rectangle were entered to a computer. So to design a circuit, we first made the layout on a sheet of paper, and then it was translated in the computer. Well, it was translated, it was put in a computer using a language that has been defined by François Anceau and developed by Ahmed Jiraya, which was called Lucy, for University Language for Education in Integrated Circuit. And Lucy dealt with essentially rectangle and hierarchy. I mean, a circuit was a hierarchy of cells, and each cell contains cells and so forth and so forth. And also some operation, like iteration, copying the same cell several times, rotation and symmetry. And we wrote several utilities that were used to send the circuit, like to flatten the hierarchy, I mean to have all the rectangles at the same level, to sort them in order to minimize the movement of the electromechanical electron being to merge them, to clean it, and so forth. So you have here the input, which is either digitalization or graphic edition or a text edition, since in the database they were all textual. And the output for now was the photo composer in Louvain-la-Neuve. Well, that's one of the most, for me, interesting slide. How did we get the mask, which is sometimes called reticle, for the circuit? So as I told you, the circuit was entered in a computer through a graphic editor on a Tektronix 4114. There is one in Aconit. After some processing, I will speak about the processing just later, the definition of the circuit, the description of the circuit was punched on a paper tape with a teletype, an SR33, an electromechanical. And after we got all the rolls of punch tape, they were put in a cardboard box and signed by mail to Louvain-la-Neuve in Belgium. And after that, they have a Gyrex photocomposer, which is, as I told you, a mechanical photocomposer. So you can see the pink roll of paper tape. So that was, I mean, description of circuit was a full box of rolls. And so what did we get from the photocomposer? So on the left, you have the first multi-ship project with 3 ships. In the middle, you have a photo of the mask, but the photo is not complete, I'm sorry. And from the Gyrex, we get a box of 8 masks, glass, made of glass, with black oxide, etched black oxide on it. So we still have in Aconit the box for the CMP81. And, well, the composition for the photocomposer limitation. The photocomposer use an aperture which was rectangular and controlled by 2 stepping motors, but it was not wide enough, not big enough to make all rectangle. So large rectangle has to be split into smaller one, which is what you can see there. And they have to overlap a little bit in order to compensate for the slack of the mechanical photocomposer. So the dot that happened on the picture is when it was been oversized a little bit. So this design is made by Yves Clausel. We spoke about Clausel just before. We went with Anso to Bulle in Paris. And I would like to stress also that in 1980, we don't have a plotter, let alone a color plotter. And this was made by an offset printer. And we have to change the ink to clean it and to change the ink each time. So there were black, green, red, and blue ink. But it is nice. So in a multi-project, there are several ships in the same package, but just one of them is connected to the packaging. I mean, so you have an example on the left of a connection, and you can notice if your eyes is sharp enough that it bears the logo of Anso Team A. And you have also another circuit with the logo of Team A as well. And you have, it was made IMAG and processed in Catholic University of Louvain. So the first CMP, so the 8081, was very local. All the design were made in Grenoble, and also wanted to make it nationwide. And so he trained the trainer through a summer school. We spoke this morning already on the Chalmazel Summer School. This summer school was 7 years old when it was used for VLSI design. Previously, was used for introduction to the use of microprocessor. So we changed microprocessor into micro. So in the right, you have artificial intelligence, and in the left, still microprocessor, and in the center, which is interesting, they say the circuit will be fabricated in the framework of the national project CMP. So it is CMP. That's it. The CMP circuit still work after more than 40 years. This is the plot of the second wafer, a photo. It's a little blurred, but it is 40 years old. And the number of circuits were 8 in 81. One batch of 3 and one batch of 5. There were 27 in 82 and 50. It was nationwide in the 60. And I think this afternoon will explain how it became bigger and bigger until under the guidance of Bernard Courtois. Well, sorry. Thank you for your patience. Don't forget to visit Aconit tonight. And in Aconit, we have the photo taken by Anso for reverse engineering. We have the mask, and we have the old computer that were used by this time. Well, I just had something. We have in Aconit the first computer that was brought by Jean Kunzmann in 51, and it's a pulse computer. I mean, it's not logic, but there is pulse or not pulse, and a lot of pulse reshaping. So it looked like.
Thank you very much for this great talk. Yes, Salvador, yeah, any question?
Merci, c'est plutôt une remarque, c'est l'importance du papier dans tout ça. Donc il y avait le re-engineering avec le microscope, c'était imprimé sur du papier. Et puis là, donc si je comprends bien, les élèves commençaient avec du papier.
Oui, tout à fait.
Donc c'était les PTT en fait qui avaient marché tout ça. Et puis vous l'envoyez en papier à Louvain. Extraordinaire.
Ce que je n'ai pas dit, c'est qu'à la fois l'émission et la réception étaient des machines électromécaniques qui sentaient bon et chaudes.
Micro.
Oh, well. I want to stress that at the paper tape were made and ridden by electromechanical machines that were both noisy and smelly.
Thank you. Yeah, there is another question there.
I have a question. How big was this box with this paper?
It was a shoe box.
And how many?
A shoe box, a box
Ah,
for
shoe
shoes.
box. And how heavy was it?
Sorry?
How heavy?
Cannot
1
say.
kilo or something like that?
No, I have to bring it to
not
the
to-
post office, but I don't know. I don't know exactly.
Okay, thank you very much again for your great talk.
Bien, bonjour à tous. Donc, je suis Pierre Benech et je suis donc administrateur général de Grenoble INP. Bien sûr, les images qui ont été montrées juste avant me rappellent des choses parce que dans les années 80, moi j'étais étudiant dans cet amphi, mais il n'avait pas cette allure-là. Et j'ai appris ces choses dans ces années-là. Et donc, voilà, ça, c'est un peu de nostalgie. Au-delà de ça, je suis sûrement pas le mieux placé pour faire l'éloge de François Anso, que beaucoup d'entre vous ont côtoyé bien plus que moi, mais je voudrais témoigner de l'attachement que nous avons dans des moments qui sont pas simples, mais qu'on sait traverser, concernant le CMP dont on vient de parler, et puis également, je voudrais rendre hommage à ceux qui portent Aconit. Aconit, c'est un peu notre mémoire. On essaye de les accompagner. Et je pense que François Anceau, vu ce qu'il a fait dans la dernière partie de sa vie, serait sûrement heureux, il l'a été, puisqu'Aconit, il l'a connu, que cela continue, malgré des difficultés de financement. Alors ce que je voudrais dire, c'est que effectivement, le CMP a 40 ans. Si Aconit est la mémoire, le CMP n'est pas le passé de la microélectronique à Grenoble. Les choses sont pas finies. Nous aurons on est dans des périodes difficiles parce qu'on doit avoir des changements. Sachez que les ministères, autant le ministère de l'Industrie que le ministère de l'Éducation nationale sont également à l'œuvre pour qu'on trouve une solution et que le futur soit solide et construit. Je pense qu'on aura dans pas longtemps une issue heureuse. Donc voilà, et je pense que François Anceau serait fier que cet objet qu'il a construit ou qu'il a co-construit perdure et se renouvelle. Quand on ne se renouvelle pas, on sait que ça s'arrête. Les arbres perdent leurs feuilles à l'automne et au printemps, ils renaissent. Et là, c'est un petit peu la même chose. Donc voilà, il faut avoir un peu confiance en l'avenir, et je crois que François l'avait. Voilà, je ne serai pas tellement plus long. On a des étoiles qui passent dans différentes disciplines. On a eu la chance à Grenoble, et c'est peut-être pas pour rien qu'on a aujourd'hui une industrie de la conception et de la technologie microélectronique qui est encore forte. Un des seuls endroits en Europe où, dans la période un peu creuse, où nos politiques n'ont pas bien compris la portée et la stratégie, l'intérêt stratégique de la microélectronique, et pour une bonne part du numérique et de tout ce qui concerne les processeurs, était ô combien essentiel. Devoir attendre d'avoir des problèmes avec les approvisionnements chinois est bien dommage. Je me souviens d'un propos échangé avec un des directeurs d'Est qui parlait avec le ministère de l'Industrie et qui lui dit « Écoutez, vous représentez 3% du poids de l'agriculture, alors c'est pas très important. » Voilà. Donc je crois que maintenant on a compris l'effet de levier et que celui qui n'a pas une technologie de l'information qui lui soit propre, ou des technologies avec l'arrivée de l'IA, du quantique, probablement, enfin on le pense, eh bien sera condamné à dépendre d'autrui, et sur le long terme, on le paiera très cher. Voilà. Donc je pense qu'il y a un renouveau et qu'il faut être au rendez-vous. Et je salue les laboratoires, à commencer par Tima sur le site, bien sûr les laboratoires du CEA qui travaillent pour que demain soit encore ici une terre de microélectronique. Voilà, je pense qu'en faisant cela, tous ensemble, on continuera le travail qui a été initié il y a plus de 80 ans, enfin plus de 70 ans, 65 ans, allez, sur le site, et que François a connu presque dans ses débuts. Voilà, je ne vous embêterai pas plus. Je sais que le taux de glucides est faible à cette heure-ci dans le sang et que je ne vais pas vous infliger plus longtemps à attendre avant d'aller vous restaurer. Je vous remercie.